As the world's first IMBA Gold Level Ride Center since 2012, Park City, Utah is a premier mountain biking destination. What makes Park City a Gold Level Ride Center? For starters, the immediate area boasts a diverse variety of trails spread across 450 miles, with everything from paved commuting paths for a family-friendly ride to aggressive cross-country rides like the epic Wasatch Crest Trail. Combined with magnificent scenery, numerous bars and restaurants, world-class accommodations, free public transit, and a wide range of entertainment options, it's no wonder that Park City was awarded gold. Experiencing Park City, Utah has never been easier, and there's never been a better time than now. Arrange your stay, rent a bike, and book a guide by visiting mountainbikingparkcity.com. Hey everybody, welcome to the Single Tracks Podcast. My name is Jeff, and today I have two very special guests, both talking about Oskar Blues and Reeb Cycles. So we have with us Jeff Lenoski, who is a pro mountain biker and Reeb-sponsored athlete. Thanks for joining us, Jeff.
Thanks for having me.
And we've also got Aaron Baker, who is the senior marketing manager for Oskar Blues. What's up, Aaron?
Hey, how's it going?
Good. So for a lot of people, Oskar Blues is known primarily as a beer company, but the brand also has a big toe in the mountain bike world with the Reeb bike brand. Aaron, what's the connection between Oskar Blues and Reeb, and how did that sort of get started?
Yeah, so the origin story is pretty funny. Dale had lent his bike to somebody.
Dale, who is the founder of Oskar Blues and Dale's Pale Ale, and yeah.
Yeah, and also the founder of Reeb Cycles. And then his bike got stolen.
What kind of bike was it? Do you know?
Oh, Jeff, I can't remember. Do you remember?
I forget the name of the brand, but Chris Solfrane, who then went on to weld frames for Reeb, was the guy making them. But I forget the brand that he was doing them under.
Yeah, so it was like sort of a boutique brand bike.
Yep, exactly. Okay. It was a handmade Colorado brand. And then I'll let Aaron finish the story. But yeah, he got his bike stolen and just said, F it, I'm going to start a bike brand.
Yeah.
in true Dale fashion.
Yeah, and I think that'll probably come up a couple times, that's the origin of a lot of these things with Oskar Blues and with Dale is either he just says, screw it, I'm going to do it myself, and started Reeb Cycles, and it sort of went from there.
Yeah, and it's kind of an unusual name until you realize that Reeb is just beer spelled backward, right?
Exactly, yeah. It helps on the side of a car if you're looking in a mirror, because then it becomes very obvious. But yeah, it's definitely a direct offshoot of what was going on with the brewery at the time, just kind of experiencing crazy growth, and mountain bike culture is so central to what Oskar Blues is all about, and the sort of lifestyle side of what we do, after work and before work. So it made sense to start making bikes, and Dale was digging the hardtail single speed thing at the time, and so they kind of started out as those kind of hardcore steel badass bikes, and it's sort of grown from there and expanded into all kinds of things.
Yeah, so this isn't just like a little side project, like I'll make a couple bikes, they'll be fun, we'll put our label on it. I mean, over the past year or two, maybe more, seems like there's been this real effort to grow the brand, and then obviously sponsoring Jeff Lenoski now and expanding the line of bikes. What's driving this? Is there a lot of demand, or is this still like Dale's just like, oh, now I need a gravel bike, now I need a full suspension?
Yeah, I mean, I think Dale just loves to interject, put all of the energy into these things, and I think he just doubled down on Reeb a couple of years ago and decided that he really wanted to make a go of it, and the bike shop had opened up around the same time, and that has been incredibly successful. So I think they decided to really go for it and expand beyond the sort of niche frames that they were making to make some frames for other folks, including, like what you said, the gravel bikes and the full suspension, which was, obviously a big change coming from the hardtails. I was a little surprised when I heard about it, but it's been amazing, and I'm sure Jeff will touch on that.
Yeah, Jeff, what's your experience been like? I feel like when we first had you on the podcast, that was right about the time maybe you were talking with Reeb or, looking at switching sponsors. Were you surprised that they were like open to sponsoring like a really well-known athlete like yourself?
Yeah, actually a little bit. I mean, I've been working with Oskar Blues for about the past 4 years. And that whole relationship started because I did a mountain bike ride in Moab. I did the whole enchilada probably 7 or 8 years ago, and prior to that, I was admittedly a trash beer drinker. I would go to brew pubs and ask, "What do you have that's closest to Coors Light?" And I remember finishing the whole enchilada with some friends from Utah, and they opened a cooler and there were Dales in there, and I was like, "What the heck is this?"
Yeah.
And I tried it, and it was awesome. So then I was always aware of Oskar Blues. I thought it was kind of cool. That was like my first bike and beer experience, to be honest with you. And then flash forward till about 4 years ago, I saw Nate Hills was wearing an Oskar Blues helmet, and then they started doing some stuff with Nico, and it was just a very casual conversation I was having with somebody at a giant sales meeting. And I don't remember how it came up, but I just said, "Oh yeah, that would be so cool to have a beer sponsor. Oskar Blues does a ton of stuff with mountain biking." And the woman that I was talking to, a friend of mine, Mercedes, was like, "Oh, I'm really good friends with Dale." And I was like, "No way, you should send an email." And I didn't think it would go anywhere, And then, the next day I got an email that Chad Mealis, who was doing marketing for Oskar Blues at the time, and Dale and myself were all copied on. And they all started responding like, "Oh, hey, Jeff, you big fan or whatever." And I was like, "Holy crap, I can't believe these guys actually know who I am." I was starstruck by them, So I was like, well, that's starting off on the right foot, because, I still remember being a kid 20 years ago, calling people randomly and trying to explain to them what you do, So I was like, if they already know who I am, that sounds pretty cool. So we had some conversations, and I learned that they were doing a bunch of events, craft beer festivals and things like that. And I, thought that was the perfect venue to do trials demos at.
Oh, for sure.
Because that was my background, was doing mountain bike trials demonstrations. So if you're not familiar with that, mountain bike trials is basically the discipline of mountain biking where it's not how far or how fast, it's just riding over stuff. So when I go for a mountain bike ride, I'm always trying to find the hardest sections of trail or boulders off the side of the trail or logs, whatever. So it's really conducive to doing a demonstration as well. So I had a truck and a trailer with a portable bicycle parkour course that you just ride all over. So that was the beginning of our relationship, was just trying to do some activations together. They had these festivals where there's crowds of people, and it's a perfect opportunity to get on your bike and demonstrate in front of people. And Aaron was one of the guys who brought me on board as well with Oskar Blues. So started doing mountain bike trials demos, and that's when I just started my YouTube channel. So they were sponsoring my videos on that too. And it was a really cool relationship, because then they started really ramping up their participation in Candade, which is a third arm of this whole thing. Candade was a nonprofit organization that Dale started years back, and it's kind of morphed into helping kids in need with musical instruments donations, bicycle instrument donations. And once I saw they were donating bicycles, that was also super close to my heart, because you could go and demonstrate for the kids. And I was lucky enough to have my parents buy me my first bike, but these kids aren't.
Yeah.
So I was doing a lot of Oskar Blues stuff and Candade stuff. And then last year I was just kind of getting frustrated with riding for such a big corporation, for a bicycle, and their needs for me didn't really align with what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. So we just started to see this disconnect. So I was sort of looking around at different opportunities. I was really surprised by the amount of attention that I had gotten from the bike industry once I started putting those feelers out, because I rode for Giant for 17 years before that, so you don't know are other people interested. Mountain biking isn't a lot of people think people knock on your door and ask to sponsor you. I could count on one hand, after riding 23 years, how many times somebody's approached me to be sponsored. Everybody just always figures if you're riding for somebody, you're good, you're happy and whatever. But the fact of the matter is I wasn't. So once I started putting those feelers out, it wasn't like super gratifying. I was just looking for something different, but it was a lot of just the same big corporations again. And it just kind of felt like the same, but different. And then it was just like a casual comment. A friend of Aaron's and mine, she also had done marketing and now she runs Candid. Diana sent out an email like, because I made a video, Farewell Giant, when I knew I was moving on, but I thought I was going to this other, basically the same size company, just different. And she said, Farewell Giant, hello Reeb, ? And I knew all the guys from Reeb, and they're super good guys. We've ridden together. Their bikes are always awesome, but it was such a small brand. I just never really thought about that as being feasible. And the second she sent that email, I was just like obsessed with that idea. I thought, I worked with a brand for 17 years. I never really had any say like in product design or whatever. They just give you stuff and you ride it and whatever.
Yeah.
Once the opportunity like presented, it was like kind of in my face because I'd been around Reeb forever, but just never thought that could actually work. Then I was obsessed. So within like 7 days, I had a bunch of phone calls with Dale. He expressed interest in like kind of growing the brand. I thought it was something that I could really sink my teeth into and try to help grow. And I made a phone call and told the other company I wasn't going to ride for him. I was going to work with Reeb. And it's honestly like the best decision I've ever made in my entire career.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah. I just, you ride for so long, you have all these ideas and input and whatever, and working with a brand where you could actually give that to somebody and see it come to fruition is awesome.
Yeah. Who would have thought the beer guys are cool?
Right. And the other thing is, talking to all my different co-sponsors, which are like a huge part of my program, it gets, you could ride for this big brand or that big brand. And there's so many like overlaps and whether people, your other sponsors want to partner with them and whatever. And the second I said Reeb, it was one of two comments. Those guys make awesome stuff, or I've never heard of them. But it was like as perfect as an image for an athlete as you could possibly have, because nobody had anything bad to say about Reeb. It was either they make awesome stuff or I've never heard of them. Perfect scenario. So even a year later, like talking to all of my partners now, like everybody's so stoked on Reeb because our product keeps getting better and better. It's a good quality product. It's made in the U.S. It's got an awesome story behind it. So it's been great. Yeah.
And are you the only athlete so far?
Well, Adam Procyse is our main fabricator of the suspension bike, and he does a bunch of racing, and he's awesome. Mm-hmm. So he is also, an employee athlete for Reeb. And then we have some ambassadors that we support. But yeah, as far as athletes of the support that I get would be like myself or Adam.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's been great.
Yeah. And so we kind of mentioned, in the lineup now, there are actually a ton of bikes. There's a gravel bike or two. There's a fat bike. There's a clunker, which is really awesome. And then, of course, some hardcore hardtails. So what are the bikes that you're currently riding? And can you tell us a little bit about them?
Yeah, that's also been one of the best parts about working with Reeb. Like everything is super organic. So we don't sit down and have marketing strategy meetings and figure out like what we need to make that's popular. It basically boils down to whether or not somebody within Reeb wants to ride it.
Yeah. They're passionate about it.
Right. So everybody was riding hardtails, and right around the time that we came out with the Squeeb, we brought in Adam, who was a super fast local Colorado guy and a fabricator outside of the bicycle world. Mm-hmm. And he really helped steer the development of that bike because he's a really good rider. He's a progressive rider. He has all these ideas that are outside the box. So he has been really responsible from taking that bike from just kind of like a trail 2.9er, 140 millimeter travel bike to a super progressive, fast, capable bike.
Yeah. Yeah. And to be clear, that's a full suspension. It's an aluminum frame. Yep.
Full suspension, aluminum mountain bike. Everything's made in the U.S. That bike is now offered in 130 millimeter configuration and 150 millimeter configuration. And the really cool thing about that bike is there is a shock mount that you could change, and you change the actual shock and the shock mount, but then you could ride the same exact frame at either 130 millimeters or 150 millimeters. So you don't need to go out and buy a new bike or whatever. It requires a different shock, but you could conceivably ride your bike 130 millimeters all week long. And if you have a trip to the bike park, twice a year, and you want to make that thing like super capable, like you can send it off anything. You just change your shock. You don't have to buy a new bike or anything. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Another super exciting thing, one of the kind of legacy bikes that they had over at Reeb was called Adiculous. So it was the Reeb Diculous. And just quick sidetrack, I worked with Oskar Blues for 3 years until I realized that Reeb was beer backwards. And I rode for Reeb for about 2 months until I realized that the Diculous was Reeb Diculous. So I don't really catch on to those things. But I remember going to Reeb Ranch in North Carolina for about 3 years, never even dawning on me that it was beer backwards. I would just go meet Aaron and do these festivals. And I think I don't know, I feel like Aaron was the guy that said something about Reeb being beer backwards once. And I was like, oh my God, I'd never realized that. So they had this really awesome bike called the Diculous. And last year I got on that bike and there was a bunch of things that I really liked about it, but there was a few things where I felt we could tweak it a little bit more to really make it like your Swiss Army knife of bikes. So I dreamt up this idea and gave it to Chris Solfrane, which was our fabricator at the time. It was basically the Diculous with a slacker head angle, shorter chainstays, and a really, really, really low standover height, just because you can get dropper posts with so much drop nowadays. You're not really limited. You don't have to have that traditional diamond frame anymore.
Right.
So he built me this like kind of out of the box, like, extreme for most standards for a hardtail. And I started riding it and I loved it. And like I said, everything there happened so organic. I started posting pictures of it. People started asking if it was available. And one thing came to another and we added it into our lineup for 2020. So that is the Ridiculous. So we have the Diculous, which is more of your just traditional trail bike packing bike, a little bit more XC. And then we also have the Ridiculous that I could take to any bike park and send off any drop or do my trials inspired riding. If I was stranded on a desert island with one bike, I'd probably take the Ridiculous.
Oh, cool. So yeah, is that the one you do a lot of your trials stuff, or do you still have like a dedicated trials bike that you pull out for certain things? So
the one cool thing about that, when I go for Can-Day trips, I'm usually going to different areas and doing demos for kids, and then also, trying to hit up local trails. Whenever I go and do those trips, I'll always bring the Ridiculous. But if I was going to like really get into like super difficult trials riding or doing like, if I knew I was only going to do a trials demo, I did have the guys from Reeb make me a 27.5 custom trials bike. That's really awesome. And again, I had two people from Instagram ask if that bike was available. And one of the things that we do as Reeb is, make custom bikes. So we obviously have our quote unquote production bikes, but two different guys reached out and said they wanted a 27.5 trials bike and we made them for them. So that's kind of obscure. I wouldn't really call that a production thing because there's not a ton of people that want trials bikes nowadays, but we made it and I love it. And a couple people have bought them.
Yeah. Wow. That's cool.
And then we have some gravel bikes. We have some new gravel products coming out. I just got one of our gravel bikes and I'm loving it. So yeah, so we have the hardtail mountain bikes, this 2 suspension mountain bikes, and some cyclocross and gravel bikes that we are in the process of updating, but we've had in the lineup for a number of years.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I want to ask a few more questions about the bikes, but also, Aaron, we're going to get to you. We're going to talk about beer as well in the second half of the show. So
I feel like I've been stealing all the airtime.
No. Bikes are just as important as beer in my mind.
Exactly.
So.
Yep. So, Jeff, you mentioned that there's a production facility in Lyons, Colorado, where the bikes are fabricated and built. Are the aluminum frames being built there as well? It seems like that's kind of rare to see domestic frame builders working in aluminum.
It's very rare to see bikes made in the U.S. now, but those bikes are made entirely in Colorado.
Oh, cool.
So all the CNC machining is done there. The welding is done there, the mitering of the tubes, everything's built in-house. And one really cool fun fact about the space that we're in now is our production facility is now in the barn where Dale originally made their first Dale's Pale Ale.
Wow.
So there's some really cool history behind the space that we're in.
Yeah, that's really cool. Are there like two separate tool sets then? Because Reeb still does a lot of bikes in steel as well, right?
Yep. They different welding setups, different jigs and stuff like that. But we have two full-time welders there now. Adam Procise, who I mentioned earlier, who's a super fast enduro racer. He does most of our aluminum fabrication, and then he does some steel frame fabrication. And we have another welder, Paul, that helps out with that, and Sam. So everything is welded there.
Cool. So we also kind of mentioned Reeb Ranch, which is a spot in western North Carolina near Dupont State Forest, actually, where there's a lot of great mountain bike trails. And it's like a big, I don't know, what would you call it? Almost like a farm. I mean, it's a ranch. It's like a ranch where people can stay and there's events that are held there. And then also, obviously, there's the bike brand and the bike shop in Longmont. Does somebody, I guess I know the answer to this. I know who it is. It sounds like Dale has a bit of an addiction to spending money on his hobbies, or maybe, like you guys said, he just kind of follows his interests. But are these things profitable from a business standpoint? Aaron, maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, I don't know if it's an addiction, but Dale just loves pushing boundaries and the guy, if you spent any amount of time with him, he just has an insane amount of energy that seems to come from some mysterious place. So I think he's constantly looking for projects to pour that energy into, and he kind of, if he's going to do something, he's going to go all out. So that's the beginnings of a lot of these things. Just are, come from that crazy energy source that I'm still trying to find out where it comes from. But I think it's just some mystical place that only he controls. So, but yeah, a lot of these things, because they're so authentic and organic, and, that energy, I think, has been, Dale also surrounds himself with just amazing people. And I think, the Reeb guys are certainly a testament to that, where they're just fun to be around, and it feels like a family. And I'm sure Jeff, that was my experience when I just first started working at Oskar Blues, and when I met the Reeb guys back then. And, so Dale surrounds himself with these great people, and that translates to the customer too, or the consumer. And, as a marketing guy, it's really just my job to not screw up, because so much of it is authentic and real. And we do the best we can to communicate that to people. But I think we've been lucky enough to have Dale as the source of a lot of that. And if you start out, along the right path, doing the right things, then the money and the profitability and the ability to do more cool, that comes along with all that.
Yeah, that's a great answer, a great way to look at it. So Oskar Blues started in Colorado and then opened a second brewery in North Carolina near the Pisgah National Forest. I think it was about 8 years ago, and that's where you're located, right, Aaron?
Yep, I'm there right now.
So what made that location a good choice to open a second brewery?
So, the guys at Oskar Blues and Dale were really looking at where we were shipping beer at that time, right around 2011, 2012. And, I think they were a little surprised at how much beer was getting shipped east of the Mississippi. And we still cold ship all our beer, which is better for the beer itself. It travels better. It gets to the consumer and the beer drinker fresher, and especially with hoppy beers, that's a really important trait. So, but cold shipping beer, especially over long distances, also gets to be a little bit expensive. So, it started to make sense to look at a location somewhere along the East Coast. And Dale had a very good friend who lives in Brevard and is actually in the music industry, but So Dale had visited him and ridden his bike around the area. I think back then I don't think Pisgah was even really talked about at the time. It was more about Solly and places like that. But this was before, I think, Bible of the Bike came out in like 2012, and that's when Pisgah kind of blew up. But, Dale had definitely been around the area and really fell in love with Brevard. Speaking of Lyons, where Reeb Cycles is and where we still have our little pilot brewery. Lyons, is a tiny little town in Colorado and has the hometown feel and, the family atmosphere that I kind of talked about earlier. And Brevard, I think, shares a lot of those same, characteristics. So Dale kind of fell in love with Brevard, but also riding his bike up here. And really, it was around that same time that New Belgium and Sierra Nevada announced that they were coming to Asheville. And I don't think our decision had anything to do with them. Dale just really loved this area and knew that, if he was going to have to visit a place multiple times a year, he wanted to be somewhere where he could take his bike and ride his bike and get some rides in, before and after work. But I think along with that, I think he knew that, a culture develops around a place, when you can ride your bike and be at some of the best trails on the East Coast within, a 10-minute bike ride from where you work. That really affects, the culture of who your employees are, but also who your customers are, in the tap room. And so that, that was a pretty bold move at the time because Brevard's not, the biggest city, and it's certainly not, logistically the best place to be, but I think he knew that we were going to build something special here, and that certainly has come to pass for sure.
Yeah, that's really cool. Jeff, I want to ask you about some of the events that Oskar Blues puts on, because you mentioned participating in some of those in years past. So Burning Can, that's one that's held, I believe, in Colorado and also now in North Carolina. What's that event about for you, and how would you explain it to people who've never been?
Aaron would know some more specifics as to how many different breweries, but Burning Can is a craft beer festival where Oskar Blues invites in different craft breweries from all across the country. And as a person coming to the festival, you can sample all different beers from all these different breweries. And then there's a huge music festival that's part of it. And then in true Oskar Blues fashion, they like to add a bunch of different activities for people to do that are kind of in line with what Oskar Blues likes to do. So they usually have mountain bike rides. There is a beer run at some of them, or both of them. There is a really cool event in Lyons, Colorado that we had last year called Rad Track, which was basically like a closed course. It was kind of fashioned after the movie Rad. So we did a four up, so I guess head to head race where you would take a lap around this track, and it had different obstacles and stuff. Nothing too crazy because we want to make it all inclusive to anybody who wants to come and give it a shot. But you would race head to head in an elimination style format over this kind of wacky, goofy, closed course, bicycle course. So they had that event. How many breweries do they typically have at them, Aaron?
It's like over 70 at this point.
Wow. And that's really interesting too, that a brewery would put on a thing for other breweries. I mean, it's not a competitive thing, I assume.
No, it actually started, it's been going now for, I think this is like the 10th or 12th year in Colorado, and we're on our 7th year in North Carolina. So it really started, out of the craft beer in a can thing that Dale started with Dale's Pale Ale in 2002. And back then it was, kind of unheard of to have, it was definitely unheard of to have a kick-ass beer out of a can like Dale's. And so the Burning Can Festival was sort of a way to celebrate, the breweries that were hopping on the trend with us and putting beer in a can.
And now everybody does it, so it's not like a unique thing.
Now it's a little less novel than it used to be, but it's still really it to me it's everything that Oskar Blues is in an entire weekend. So yeah, it's exactly what Jeff described. There's like 70 plus breweries at each of them, music all weekend, camping, and then a ton of outdoor events, bike rides of every variety. There's yoga, there's a paddle trip. So it's a great weekend. It's it's fun to invite all of our brewing friends there, and all the beer's poured out of cans still. So it's cool. It's in May in Colorado and early August in North Carolina. So check it out for sure.
Okay. Awesome. So yeah, you mentioned that Oskar Blues was one of the first to can craft beer. Well, what's the advantage? Why are cans better than bottles? I mean, it seems like everybody's doing it now, so there must be an advantage to it.
Yeah, there's a lot of advantages. I think the question really should be why people are still bottling.
It's nostalgia. I mean, people, like you said, people had this. I mean, I remember this several years ago, right? People placed a premium on beer out of a bottle. They claimed it tasted better, or maybe it looked cooler. I don't know, but yeah, there are advantages to the can, right? Yeah,
I mean, first of all, the fact that aluminum is infinitely recyclable, that's a huge, benefit. Aluminum's just a better product at this point.
Yeah, a lot of communities don't recycle glass anymore, which a lot of people maybe don't realize.
It's more expensive to recycle glass, and you actually end up with less material than you started with, unlike aluminum. So, and then for the beer itself, I mean, you think about a brown bottle, which is, the typical color of a beer bottle. You can still see the beer inside that bottle, which means that there's light that's still getting in that bottle. And the two things that can ruin beer are light and oxygen. So if a little bit of light is getting in, it's still, not as good as a completely opaque aluminum can that prevents all light from getting in. And then you can get a better seal on the top of a can, that keeps all that oxygen out. And so the beer, stays fresher longer. It's also lighter. So if you're talking about shipping, we talked a little bit about shipping across the country earlier. Your carbon footprint is a lot smaller if you're shipping lighter products, and it's also cheaper for the brewery. So a lot of benefits there. And then we haven't even talked about the most important part about being able to take it wherever you want, on a bike ride or camping, hiking, boating, whatever, music festivals. So, like I said, I mean, I think in the very beginning, Dale talks about people laughing at him when he was trying to sell this hoppy pale ale out of a can, and they just didn't get it back then. But now I think, the script has kind of flipped, and I don't really understand why people are still putting beer in bottles. I've seen some advertisements from some of our competitors where there's, this nice camping scene, and then people are drinking out of bottles, and I don't understand how they got there with those bottles, or what they're going to do with those bottles when they're done.
Yeah, smash them against some rocks. That's what we want, right?
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, that's really interesting. One of the only negative I've heard from one of my buddies is that the can makes more noise when you open it. So he can't quietly open it so that his wife doesn't hear him, cracking a beer after dinner.
Oh, there's definitely an art to that. You got to get the right tone of cough that completely drowns out the opening of the can. Yeah. Not that I've ever done that in a movie theater or anything like that.
So, Aaron, what kind of trends are you seeing in craft beer styles today? When Oskar Blues was starting out, it was all about really hoppy beers like Dale's Pale Ale and a lot of the IPAs and things like that. Are you starting to see that change at all? Are people looking to other styles of beer as they, move through the really hoppy beers?
The funny thing is, I mean, I think it's the media's job to constantly look for, what the new thing is. And so these things pop up that people, assume are the new and big things. But if you really dig into the numbers and I'm a marketing guy, so I try to not focus on the numbers too much. But the sales guys, when they bring the numbers to us, IPA is really the only style within craft beer that's still showing growth, and it's massive growth. So because craft beer as a whole is growing, so all these other styles are kind of either flat or declining a little bit, and IPA continues to grow like crazy. So there certainly are segments within the IPA category that are like those low-cal beers or lower ABV, and those have seen a little bit of a spark recently. I think there's also, outside of IPA, I think people are starting to look back towards lighter options like pilsners and lagers. I think we'll continue to see that grow, as people either move from big domestic beer to craft beer, or also, are introduced to these lighter options within the craft beer segment. A lot of people that have been drinking IPA for 10 years might get a little tired, and, some of those we've got a new lager series called Slow Chill, which, is a rotating series of 3 different lagers throughout the year. And, I think there's been a lot of attention towards that brand. I think people are pretty excited about, all the possibilities of within the lager segment. There's a lot of variety that I think, still can be explored.
Yeah, interesting. What about within IPAs? Another one is the hazy IPAs. Is that one still going pretty strong, or was that like a kind of a flash in the pan kind of thing?
I think, that's the thing. I said, there's all this growth within IPA as a whole, but, if you can break down IPA into all these subcategories and they each kind of come and go. So I think hazy will probably be here to stay. I don't think it'll be quite as fervent as it was like a year ago. A year ago, if your beer wasn't cloudy, it almost wasn't worth drinking for some people. But I think people are starting to realize that the haze doesn't necessarily mean it's a quality beer, and so I think I think it'll be here to stay, but I don't think it's going to be quite as ubiquitous as it was a year ago.
Interesting. So you mentioned, it sounds like Dale's Pale Ale was that the first Oskar Blues beer in the lineup?
Yep. That was the first one that was canned. Yep. Okay.
And then you've got other like standards that have been around a while, like Mama's Little Yellow Pills and Old Chub, which is probably one of my favorites. Are the recipes for those tweaked a little bit over time, or is that the kind of thing where, like, if Dale's was changed from like that original recipe, would people get upset and like not drink it anymore?
Yeah, so, this is something that I've learned in my time in the beer industry that I think is fascinating. And we get this question a lot about, like, the recipes and matching flavor. And I think, the thing that people, I think, often don't realize is that these the ingredients that you're putting into the beer are, they're agricultural ingredients. So they're grown every year. They have a season, and there's a certain time of year when they're harvested. And so, it's not like the product isn't 100% consistent, depending on, climate and weather patterns and, various things. The hops from one harvest can be a little bit different than the hops at the next harvest. So, you might have the recipe written down as a certain amount of pounds of a certain hop variety, but you have to tweak that every year as the different hop harvests come back and have different flavor profiles. So it's not really about the recipe, it's more about, what that beer, the flavor of that beer, as intended by the brewers. And so, the recipe does actually change slightly in order to maintain consistent flavor. And so they're all kind of evolving constantly, but with the goal of maintaining the same flavor. But it's kind of a little bit of a moving target because, like I said, the malt, can change from year to year, and hop varieties can have a difference between last year's harvest and this year's harvest.
Yeah. And I guess beer too. I mean, you kind of touched on this, but it's pretty ephemeral, right? Like you couldn't save a can from 2018 Dales and then, pour it in a glass and put a brand new Dales in a glass and drink them and try to compare them, because obviously the older one is you expect that one to taste a lot different. I mean, it's not going to last, right?
Right. Yeah. That's the thing that, I definitely didn't understand as a college student, doing a keg stand. Like, beer is a high quality food product, and so it does degrade, and especially hoppy beers are going to change over time. So, the fresher you can get it, the better. And that does make it tricky to compare, between recipes or batches of Dales. We do various things. We have quality control labs at every single brewery of ours. And so we're constantly blind taste testing beers throughout the entire life cycle, when they're in the building being brewed, and also after they're packaged. We're tasting beers, to sort of simulate what they're doing on the shelf as well.
Interesting. Well, I imagine you can probably compare two different Dales that were produced at two different facilities. Is that difficult to make a Dales brewed in North Carolina, say, taste exactly the same as one that's brewed in Colorado?
I mean, I think it's definitely difficult in the very beginning. I think, I was here when we were getting started in North Carolina, and there was a lot of back and forth about the different water and the minerals that are in the water here versus the minerals that are in the water in Colorado, and how that changes. And they have to actually add minerals in order to match the water before we even start brewing. So yeah, there's a constant battle. And like I said, we have these amazing lab techs that are constantly working on this stuff, and we've gotten a lot better at it too. I mean, I used to do the tasting. We do every day at 11 o'clock at each of our breweries. There's a tasting, and back in the day when I was going to it, it was really just 8 to 10 dudes in a circle drinking beer and shooting the shit about what they thought about it, and there wasn't a whole lot of science going on. But now, they've each got, this app on their phone that they're logging in. There's no talking, first of all.
Yeah, you don't want to influence. Yeah, you don't want to influence each other. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very serious. It's completely blind, and they're logging in their, quantitative measurements of flavor and aroma on their phones individually, and then all of that is pooled together and compared to, either the same can from Colorado or a different batch that we have in house. So it's pretty amazing. It's pretty complex. I'm just the marketing guy, so I don't understand, all the ins and outs of it. But a lot of effort goes into matching those flavors to make sure, that they're consistent between facilities and between, the Dales we brewed last week and the one we've got going on this week.
Yeah, interesting. Jeff, do you have a favorite Oskar Blues beer that you like?
TB IPA. I had the opportunity to do a beer collaboration with Oskar Blues this past year or this year, and it's called TB IPA, which is short for Trail Boss IPA.
Oh, wow.
But prior to that, I would say Dales or Pinner. Pinner just because it's a little bit lighter, so if you need to hydrate a little bit extra after a ride, you can do so without wanting to sleep off the ride the rest of the day.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I have a question. I don't mean to put either of you guys on the spot. This is a question that just kind of came to me probably, I guess, over the weekend before we are having our conversation. But is there ever any concern that like this promoting bikes and beer together could lead to some problems? Like obviously, like driving under the influence is a problem, and same with biking. I mean, in most places, you can be arrested for the same exact thing if you're biking under the influence. So, what would you tell people, I guess, that are choosing to have a beer after a ride? Like, not to harsh the flow here or anything, but like, are people concerned about that? Like, do you get groups writing to you saying like this is irresponsible, or like, yeah, what's kind of your thoughts on that? I'll give that to you first, Aaron, since you're the marketing guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're pretty clear to say that these are post-ride refreshments only, and we have to be real careful with that at our events and at the Reeb Ranch, which is also a functioning bike park. And, there's absolutely no riding if you've had anything to drink. So, like you said, we don't want to harsh the vibe, but nothing is going to harsh the vibe more than if somebody gets hurt or anything like that. So, it's core to the culture of Oskar Blues to share a beer with your buddies after a ride. We don't really emphasize the after ride, but it's a very important part of that sentence, which is after the riding for sure.
And in a lot of places too, I mean, it may not be allowed. I mean, it depends on where you are. If you're in I think like most national forests, you're probably not supposed to do it. I mean, maybe it depends. I haven't researched it myself, and I know plenty of people do it. But yeah, I guess that's another concern, is to make sure you're doing it in a place where you're allowed to.
Yeah. Another benefit of having a brewery right outside the national forest is we're a short bike ride away.
Yeah, and the brewery too. I mean, it should be mentioned, I've stopped at the brewery in Brevard many times, after a big ride in Pisgah, and that's a totally appropriate place to go and drink several beers.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one final question for you, Aaron. So how has the explosion of like new craft breweries over the last 4 to 5 years affected Oskar Blues? I mean, Oskar Blues is one of the early pioneers sort of in this space, and is now one of the biggest. Do you see like an effect from all these new breweries, or is this like a case of all, rising tide lifting all boats?
Well, I mean, there's definitely an effect, but I think it's not quite as simple as most people talk about it as being a bubble.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy, the numbers. Like there were, I don't know, hundreds of breweries, like 10 years ago, and now there are thousands. Yeah,
and more in the planning stages, every day. So, I think the thing that I always say is for the corner breweries, for your hometown brewery, and there's still a lot of runway for little small breweries to open up to service, a neighborhood or 10 neighborhoods within a city. So that I don't really think we're even close to a bubble when you look at that scale, the super small scale. Where it gets a little tricky is in the medium scale, kind of where Oskar Blues was a few years back. And this is part of the reason that we've partnered with some other breweries and created the Canarchy Craft Brewery Collective, which you may have heard of. Yeah. But Canarchy is a group of breweries from across the country that sort of share resources. Cigar City Brewing is one of the other big ones from Tampa. Got breweries really all over the country. And so, we've kind of banded together in order to weather some of the storms of being, a sort of medium-sized brewery, and which can make growing a little trickier because you have to extend yourself in order to, create the capacity to make more beer. And if you're not, constantly growing, you can put yourself in a bad position. So it's better, to share some resources, and there's a ton of benefits that go along with that. We talked a little bit about ingredients earlier, but when we have the buying power of multiple breweries, we can really select the best ingredients because those hop growers, they choose who gets to pick first, and so a lot of times they do that by how big the contract is. And so if you have a bigger contract because you're buying for 7 breweries instead of just one, then you have the opportunity to pick really the best quality ingredients. And then maybe some of the innovative stuff that, they're not selling to other people, so you can be on the cutting edge. So there's a ton of benefits of that, and that's the way we've sort of weathered some of the trials of the last couple of years. But really, I mean, that's the biggest point I would want to make, is it's kind of an oversimplification to say that there's a bubble that's going to burst. There's so much energy in craft beer and so many great things going on, and I think it's pretty badass to have 8 breweries within a town. I mean, Brevard has 8,000 people, and we've got 5
Wow.
breweries. So and we love that. I mean, it's great, and I think there's probably room for more. So, like I said, I mean, those little corner breweries that are making beer just for the people, having a pint after work. There's still room for a ton more of those kind of breweries out there.
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks so much, guys, for taking the time to talk about bikes and beer. Really appreciate it, and I know our listeners have learned a ton. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So you can learn more about Oskar Blues at oskarblues.com, and you can learn more about Reeb Bikes at reebcycles.com, and we'll have those links for you in the show notes. That's all we've got this week. We'll talk to you again next week.